What could I say, Jeff Stein? What is there to say? Right? I don't hear you, Jeff.
Oh, I'm here.
What's there to say this morning? There's nothing to say, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of sad. Yeah, Offense didn't get into gear.
It's also what happens when you don't have a closer.
Yeah.
What was the only good thing about last night? There was one good thing about last night. What was it?
No one got hurt.
That's true. No, you have to think of the global, bigger picture.
Made it through so far in the playoffs and the bubble. Nope.
It's not really about the Dodgers. It's actually the exact opposite. If you're going to lose, if you're going to get dominated in the playoffs and lose to a pitcher, you want it to be a 26-year-old Jewish kid from Encino, California.
I thought the name kind of sounded. Yeah,
whose biggest hero is Sandy Koufax.
Yeah, that's true. Very good. Yeah,
he grew up playing baseball with my brother David, and
no way.
We're on the same team. Yeah, he spoke to him a few months ago. I said,
"Wow,
still keep in touch with him?" He goes, "Yeah, I just spoke to him a few months ago." There was a nice article about him in JTA that he talks about his love of Sandy Koufax and the fact that that's his hero. So.
Oh, good. Yeah. That would have helped them last night. But also knowing that the Lakers won the night before, so it's a 7-game series. Can't win everything, but it's good to know that it was Jewish. That would have helped. Oh yeah. It's only game one.
As I said, that is the upside of a very bad Dodger game last night.
But there's no way the Dodgers are going to beat the Braves.
Oh, stop it!
Braves have a good team.
I understand they have a good team, and so do the Padres.
They have better pitching, though.
Padres were devastated by it.
The Braves have better pitching.
I disagree. You miss my point. There was only one good thing about yesterday's game, and it's this. I like to say, if you're going to get dominated by a player, let it be Max Fried. There he is. And here's the story. Max Fried, the Jewish lefty. So, he went to Harvard Westlake. That's where he went to. But he grew up a Jewish kid from the Valley. So, anyways, I think we'll be back on track. I think everybody's everybody needed a little wake up call. But no. All I can tell you is that their path to the World Series is definitely there this year.
Well, I think the Braves are going to win the whole thing.
Okay, all right. I heard you. I honestly, Mike,
I'd put 2 cents on that.
Okay. The pitching of Washington's pitching last year was better than Atlanta's pitching, so I don't know why you're so worried, but
the Dodgers have terrible starting pitchers. Besides, you have Kershaw and Buehler can go 4 or 5 innings.
What are you talking about? They gave up one. They gave up one run.
But I'm saying is pitchers for the Dodgers cannot go more than 4 or 5 innings.
Okay. Well, I will tell you, I'm not. I think Max Fried is pitching out of his mind right now, and I think after today, you're going to see. There's a reason why the Dodgers won 3/4.
Okay, we have 2 cents on this.
I don't have any. No one would take my money.
And I will donate that 2 cents to the temple.
Back to the temple. All right. Well, I appreciate that. We have.
Rabbi, good morning.
Now that we've had Dodger talk, what?
Rabbi, I just want to tell you, I'm going to put me on I'm going to go off video because I have to multitask and watch the Comey Barrett hearings as well as your.
I understand. I'm competing with Dodger games at night, and I'm now competing with politics in the morning. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of, it's a busy time. Well, it's, hopefully stuff will, will work out for everybody and our country and everybody else. There's obviously a lot more that we have to think about here too, but it's good to keep our minds active and fresh and thinking about Torah stuff. And
seriously, by Saturday night, the Simchat Torah, whatever you want to call it, Mary loved the songs.
Good.
She loved the music.
Well, we were trying to figure out how to do something with music, and it was maybe doing Jewish music, and then I was like, well, we hear Jewish music a lot.
Some of it was a stretch. A couple of those songs were a stretch, but
I will tell you, I put a lot of thought into it. I only had 7 songs, so I had to make them pay.
But the Bruce Springsteen version of Turn, Turn, Turn was pretty cool.
I know. There you know. Who knew that he did a version with Roger McGuinn that's actually out there? I think he did a great job, but to have Roger McGuinn singing with him was, I love when he does that. He does
Absolutely.
that all. He'll have, Bono from U2 sing with him, or I'll have, somebody from, R&B singer from 40 years. I love when Springsteen does that. Anyways, it was meant to be fun and meant to be enjoyable. And Simchat Torah this year definitely was not that one. Where there was no way to make that the same. I hope people also saw at least some of the discussions with our candidates. I think overall, people were pretty impressed with some of them. Especially, I got to say, the younger candidates were really, not that everybody was good, but the younger candidates really gave you a lot of hope that young people are staying engaged.
And Rabbi, I wrote in you for president when I voted.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to.
You'll get one vote for president.
Did you really? Did you really?
No.
Mike, I thought you liked him.
Never.
I thought I thought I'd get a couple, though.
We tried to get you to run for governor, remember?
Yeah. I think
Anybody would be better than what we have.
I think Suzette did a really great job. I didn't really know her at all. And Kip, I'd spoken to a couple times, and I really like both of them. They're both in their 30s and both had a lot of passion. And again, I think after the Katie Hill debacle, I think a lot of people were kind of like, oh, we can't let young people in, and I think. Well, I think Suzette has a very good chance, and I think that obviously that's not the case. I mean, I hope the whole generation doesn't get punished for a couple mistakes, and I really do think there are a lot of young people in politics right now who are on all sides who are exciting, engaging. They're passionate. They're trying to do good things, and I hope they get a chance. I mean, even if they have to put in more time serving and working their way up, I hope young people don't get frustrated and discouraged by the political process, because honestly, that's our, everybody says it's the future, but it really is. I mean, if we don't get,
people do too, though.
What?
Get frustrated by the political process.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if we don't get young people engaged in doing that, going on that process of doing the council and the work their way up, what are we going to do? I mean, we can't have. Well, we could. I mean, that's kind of the futuristic nightmare that we have people's disembodied heads running the country in the future, cryogenically preserved. But yeah, we don't have that technology, and that's not the way to create a country of the future. So let's hope that we continue to get young people involved and excited and have the opportunities to lead. So anyways, we're We're going to turn the reading over this morning, and again, it's kind of cool because we've entered Genesis. Tomorrow night we're going to look at Genesis. I love looking at Genesis. I really do. I mean, I have to say, I always love when we get to study Genesis in depth, and we're going to be doing that. And again, it's like I'd like to get to other books of the Bible too. Again, I have to figure out how to do that, but I always get like reinvigorated when we come back to Genesis and we start looking at the Torah portions from Genesis. I'm going to be very upfront and honest that it's tough sometimes. And when you get into the stories of Genesis, they're so rich and they're amazing stories. They're written so with so much depth, but also ability to think about things, and it is an amazing thing. And so I love when we do that, and we're doing that, and we'll be able to start doing it on Wednesdays now, getting back into Genesis. But what's cool about the Midrash class is we've been studying Genesis for these last several months. I mean, a year really, going back to over a year. We've been reading about Adam and Eve and Abraham and Isaac, going through all the way to, Noah. It was months even just on Noah, the Midrash on Noah. And so as we come to the end of Genesis, in our readings, we're actually at the end of we're at the end of Genesis, but there is so much here that the rabbis can decompress and have amazing legend based on these based on these stories. And just the last few weeks, all we've been doing is reading about the sons of Jacob giving their final words and kind of their take on things, because we don't hear from Zebulun and Issachar and Gad and Asher during the Bible. They have no lines. I mean, when you're doing Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, you don't want to be Zebulun. That's not the part you want to get. You want to be Joseph, and if you can't be Joseph, then get to be Judah. There's not a lot, and that's just one example, but there are not a lot of lines that come with these other brothers. Obviously, actually, you want to get Pharaoh, but if you don't get into the Midrash, you never hear their words. You never hear them say anything, and so that's why I really love studying the Midrash. And in this case, we're not even studying traditional rabbinic Midrash these last weeks. We've been studying the testaments of the patriarchs of the 12 sons of Jacob. These testaments were written by Jews, but they were written by Jews that were not necessarily rabbinic Jews. They were written by Jews that were living in ancient Israel and had almost a Greco-Roman cultural influence. And so we're not just reading Midrash, we're reading kind of like what Jews of the time 2,000 years ago were thinking. And the rabbis, in some cases, are fighting against some of those beliefs because they're too Greco-Roman. What made it into the 12 patriarchs, the testament of the 12 patriarchs, there's nothing here that's really anti or out of the realm of Judaism, but it definitely isn't what the rabbis were teaching. It wasn't the main part of their theology or what was on their agenda. But they knew about it. They have some similar midrashim for sure. They were drawing on similar, probably oral sources, and it's interesting. It's interesting to look at, because I think when we see these stories, we're actually seeing what like kinds of stories that people used to talk about when they sat around the campfire, or their own backyards, whatever. They would talk about what the common person might have been thinking about when it came to these patriarchs. So we're going to have Judith read today. Unfortunately, Rosemary is occupado. She would have been here, but she's got some stuff this morning. So we're taking over. Last week we looked at the first 5 or 6 kids we went through Issachar, and we went through Levi, and we went through Shimon, Judah, the sons of Leah. And now we are continuing with the sons of Leah. The last sons of Leah are Issachar and Zebulun. These are the sons that were born after Bilhah and Zilpah entered the picture. And so let's take a look. So Judith, you want to start off with Zebulun. Again, the son who, according to tradition, became a seafarer, a merchant, if you will.
Zebulun exhorts unto compassion. When Zebulun attained the age of 114 years, which was 2 years after the death of Joseph, he called his sons together and admonished them in these words to lead a life of piety. I am Zebulun, a precious gift for my parents, for when I was born, my father became very rich by means of the streaked rods in herds of sheep and herds of cattle. I am conscious of no sin in me, and I remember no wrong done by me, unless it be the unwitting sin committed against Joseph. In that I did not, out of consideration for my brethren, disclose to my father what had happened to his favorite son, though in secret I mourned exceedingly. I feared my brethren because they had agreed that he who betrayed the secret should be slain with the sword. When they planned to kill Joseph, I besought them amid tears not to sin thus.
All right, so let's pause right there. So here's an interesting question, which at least again, we have this version of. What did the other brothers who don't say anything, what do they say or think even? Well, first of all, here it says Zebulun is born after Jacob has already kind of taken on those he kind of tricks his father-in-law Laban into giving him the sheep that were drinking from the trough with the streaked rods, where he puts these rods underneath. It's this weird story of kind of genetically engineering the sheep that he gets to take. And so he says that his father Jacob had already done this by that point, and so he's already successful. So then he says, look, I haven't done anything wrong in my life, going back 114 years. I can't think of anything I've done wrong, but maybe the Joseph story. And you're like, well, what are you talking about? You 100% had a problem with Joseph. You were responsible or complicit in his being sold into slavery. How could you just say, except for that? And so there's this interesting explanation that they give, which is that Zebulun and maybe the other brothers, some of the other brothers, didn't really have a choice in the matter. Because according to what we just read, if he spills the beans, he's dead, right? The old snitches get stitches theory of gang warfare, gang life. It's pretty bad that the brothers threatened the other brothers that you better go along with this, and that they would make good on the threat because they had already done it to one of the other brothers. So according to this, he feels at least that he's free of the responsibility for this. Look, the text, we don't have anything in the text that has any of the brothers trying to do anything different except for Reuben. The Bible says that Reuben wanted to come back and save him. Other than that, we don't read that any of the brothers wanted to save him. Yet we have this midrash, we have this explanation that this is what Zebulun, one of these again unembellished, really unknown brothers, has to say about it. So again, it's an interesting way to absolve at least some of the brothers of wrongdoing. They really would have had something to be afraid of. So again, we don't have this in the Bible, but we do have a Midrash. We do have explanations that the brothers didn't all agree to it. So that is maybe one of the reasons why we can listen to Zebulun and say, Zebulun, teach us, what should we do? So here's what he says.
And now, my children, hearken unto me. I exhort you to observe the commands of the Lord and have mercy upon your neighbors and act compassionately, not only toward men, but also toward dumb brutes. For on account of my mercifulness, the Lord blessed me. All my brethren fell sick at one time or another, but I escaped without any illness. Also, the sons of my brothers had to endure disease, and they were nigh unto death for the sake of Joseph, because they had no pity in their hearts. But my sons were preserved in perfect health, as you well know. And when I was in Canaan catching fish at the shores of the sea for my father Jacob, many were drowned in the waters of the sea. But I came away unharmed, for you must know that I was the first to build a boat for rowing upon the sea. And I plied along the coasts in it and caught fish for my father's household until we went down to Egypt. Out of pity, I would share my haul with the poor stranger. And if he was sick or well on in years, I would prepare a savory dish for him. And I gave unto each, according to his needs, sympathizing with him in his distress, and having pity upon him. Therefore the Lord brought numerous fish to my nets. For he that gives aught to his neighbor receives it back from the Lord with great increase. For 5 years I fished in the summer, and then in the winter I pastured the flocks with my brothers.
Yeah, he went up to Alaska, worked on a fishing boat. No, look, the Bible says he went out to sea, and that is Zebulun's blessing, is that, he brings in from the waters. Here it basically says that he's a fisherman. He's a fisherman and uses the fish to help take care of the poor, which is why he is also a righteous guy. That he uses his skills on the waters to help others. And of course, what did that do? It made it easier for people to live during the years of famine, because there was no stuff growing. So that's how he's able to use his skills, his background on the waters, to help others. Now, of course, it does say that he still did the traditional pasturing with his family. So even though he did that, he didn't give up on the traditional family business, which I think is interesting. Because, again, you could say, well, he went out, he fished, and that was his livelihood. He says, no, he did that in the summer, came back home in the winter and did the job with his family, with the rest of his family. So it's an interesting little midrash that, again, he starts using his naval skills early on. It also tells us that the family was punished for what happened to Joseph. That the sons of Jacob and the grandsons were also punished and had bad health because of their complicity and in some cases their actual sin of taking care of their brother in such a horrible way, right? Almost killing him and then selling him into slavery. So there was a punishment. There was an accounting, according to this, for not just the sons but also the grandsons. Their children paid the price for this too. So, what does Zebulun say?
Now, my children, have pity and compassion on all men, that the Lord may have pity and compassion on you. For in the measure in which man has mercy with his fellow men, God has mercy with him. When we came down to Egypt, Joseph did not visit upon us the wrong he had suffered, Take him as your model, and remember not a wrong done unto you, else unity is rent asunder, and the bonds of kinship are torn, and the soul is disquieted. Observe the water. If it runs on undivided, it carries down stone, wood, and sand along with it. But if it is divided and flows through many channels, the earth sucks it up and it loses its force. If you separate one from the other, you will be like divided waters. Be not cleft into two heads, for all that the Lord has made has but one head. He has given two shoulders to his creatures, 2 hands and 2 feet, but all these organs obey one head.
Interesting, right? There's a nice image. There's nice imagery here, which is be like the water. Sounds like something Bruce Lee might have said. I think he did say that, actually, or at least he says it in the movie. But he does really teach something important, not because it's just because it's powerful, but because the water can do 2 things, right? If it hits with a full impact of lots of water, it can destroy anything. It can, nothing can stop its force. But again, if water comes down like little droplets, you never see it again. So this idea of being together and being unified, it's a great message. It's a great message for people, for a country. Not to lose your unity, because if you do, you will you'll lose your power. Your power is your unity as a group, as a family, as a community. And think about when this was written, at a time when Judaism was being led in different directions, right? And really people saying, we can't do this as a people. If we go off in different directions, we're gonna disappear. And so there's a really powerful message here that the people who wrote this embedded in here, which is that we have to stay together. We have to be able to work as one. And again, it's a great message for our country, but again, in Judaism and Jewish history, it's very important. And again, it was really important 2,000 years ago, as Judaism was going into many different directions. And the rabbis talk about the same issue, which is that we can't afford to go off into different directions. We can't, as a community, we have to stay together. We cannot allow people to go off and lead people off into different directions. There has to really be a central voice for the community, and that's not easy to do. It's not easy to do in the Jewish community, and obviously it's not easy to do, for any country or community. But you have to figure out what things do unify the community. You have to articulate what are those things that unify the community. So
that's what's happening to the Jewish community now.
Yeah, I think
to a certain degree it's divided and
yeah, I think yes and no. I think there are divisions within the Jewish community, but there are times when it comes together. And unfortunately, obviously, one of the easiest times it comes together is when something anti-Semitic happens, right? And then if there's an attack on Chabad, if there's an attack on a synagogue in Pittsburgh, that's, lots of synagogues, a Reconstruction synagogue in there, nobody says, hey, that's a Orthodox synagogue or that's a Reconstruction synagogue. They attack the Jewish community, right? So anti-Semitism gets us riled up like nothing. And the reality is that one of the few areas I do believe that Jews are united. And again, unfortunately, there are divisions in how it's applied, but Israel still is a unifying factor. And that's best seen in an event like AIPAC, where I always come out of that feeling great, because you see Jews of all different backgrounds coming together, all different ages, and you feel the power of a Jewish community that is unified. And that's one of the reasons why I go there every year, is because you hear a lot about how divided the Jewish community is, in my estimation, there are those things that really do unify the community. And I will tell you this, the differences between, and not that there was ever huge differences between the Reform and conservative community, but those are evaporating. I mean, the differences between Reform and conservative synagogues today is almost negligible, and is probably, it's going to continue along those.
Reconstructionists too, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, all of them.
Much less fringe than it was.
Yeah, but there's nobody even cares anymore. I mean, the differences that used to exist, and remember, they weren't just theological differences, Judith. I mean, there was a huge issue that people kind of, I would say, obfuscated intentionally. There were huge differences between the Reform and conservative community that had to do with culture and had to do with quite frankly, monetary success. And everybody knows it. Well, not everybody knows it, but everybody who was responsible for those movements and for what happened and why those movements existed in this country knew what they were doing, which was they did not want to have, they wanted there to be a community for those uneducated and poor Jews from Poland and Russia for them to go into, so that they wouldn't walk into the Reformed congregations, you know, on the east side of New York or on the south side of blah blah or the north side of wherever, and they didn't want those people in their community. And so the Reform movement funded the conservative movement so these people would have somewhere else to go. And that's the truth. I mean, everybody knows that. I mean, the historians know. I would say everybody knows it. There's not another reading of that. German Jews had their very classy and beautiful Reformed sanctuaries, and the conservative Jews from Poland and Russia and Belarusia and whatever, they had their, Ukraine had their little steeples, had their little Orthodox and conservative synagogues. Nobody talks about that anymore. I mean, now they don't talk about it. Nobody talks about that anymore. So I don't know. I have to say that the socioeconomic differences between the Jews, those aren't there anymore. Those are not there like they used to be. There are differences between Jews in socioeconomic levels. Don't get me wrong. There are wealthy Jews and there are very poor Jews and lots in between, but they don't go to different synagogues anymore necessarily. So I don't know. I mean, there's things that are obviously, there's big differences in Israel. At least now everybody can still come to the same synagogue. I don't know if that'll happen 10 years from now or 20 years, maybe 20 years from now. Maybe there'll be different synagogues based on your feelings about Israel. I hope not, really hope not. But, and by the way, one of the things that'll stop that from ever happening is that Israel doesn't have, I mean, 90% of the people in Israel aren't going to synagogue. So they're not going to allow Jews in America to hijack the religious whatever community. So, I mean, that's the one good thing about why I don't think it'll necessarily happen, but it could. I mean, there's definitely language that's going on that's kind of frightening in the Jewish community when it comes to Israel. But overall, on both, and again, I'm going to sound weird when I say it, but on both sides, there's language about Israel that's frightening in the Jewish community. But I do think that Israel is one of those things that we do work as a unified force still, and we're really like that water that can really be almost unstoppable when we work together and when we're a community. So I hope we can continue to do that. But you have this great lesson from Zebulun, which was don't lose that. Anyways, and again, when this was written, it had already been happening, and people saw Jews going off in different streams, right? And we actually say that, different currents or different streams, that the water comes through and then starts going off into different paths, and before you know it, it's a creek and there's no water left there anymore. But it's a great image, great metaphor for that. And again, also the thing with the head, though, I guess if you're born as a conjoined person, that's insensitive. I don't. So I don't know why my phone keeps going. Somebody in China keeps calling me. Honestly, somebody in China, but it could be actually a person. So it may not be a robocall from China. Anyways, it's not. All right. So I turned off my phone and now my computer's answering it. All right. So let's continue.
Zebulun ended his exhortation into the unity with an account of the divisions of Israel, whereof he had read in the writings of his fathers, that they would come about in future days and bring sore suffering upon Israel. However, he spoke encouraging words to his children, saying, "Be not grieved over my death, and do not lose heart at my departure from you. For I shall arise again in the midst of you, and I shall live joyously among the people of my tribe, those who observe the law of the Lord. As for the godless, the Lord will bring everlasting fire down upon them and exterminate them unto all generations. Now I hasten hence to my eternal rest with my fathers. But you, fear you the Lord your God with all your might all the days of your life." Having made an end of saying these words, he sank into the deep sleep of death, and his sons put him into a coffin, wherein they carried him up to Hebron later to bury him there next to his fathers.
Okay. Well, it's pretty nice. Pretty beautiful. Pretty beautiful last words. I mean, I guess it gets a little scary when he tells them that God's going to bring everlasting fire down on those who don't believe. But the rest of it's pretty nice. You do see a little bit of that kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily Christian, but well, the fire and brimstone stuff. And so you can start to see it here, and this kind of gives away, betrays when it was written that he talks in that kind of language, right? But he does tell the people, he tells his family, don't despair, don't give up hope. Don't worry about the future. There's gonna be rough times, but you'll come out okay. And then again, he's buried in the cave of Machpelah with his father and grandfather and great-grandfather and at least some of his brothers, according to this story. He's buried in Hebron too. So Zebulun, again, a son that we don't hear about in the Bible, has some really powerful words in this text. It's powerful words about where he came from, what his life was like, or what the experience of the brothers might have been like to the other brother, to the brothers who don't say anything. And then again, also a message of unity and strength. So it's good. It's a good piece. It's nice that we have it. And again, we wouldn't have had it if it wasn't kept in the testaments of the patriarchs. All right. The next one is not so easy to read. Well, it's not that it's easy to read or hard to read. It's not so positive. Here we have another brother, Don. Don is a son of Bilhah, so a son of one of the concubines. And well, let's read what Don has to say.
Mark, is there beyond this a tradition of which brothers are buried in Machpelah?
There is a tradition that everybody is buried in Machpelah except for Joseph. There are more than one cave. There's more than one cave in Machpelah. There is, as we saw, there's a tradition that Adam and Eve are buried there. Mm-hmm. We know who's not buried there. Let me put it that way, right? Okay. We know that Joseph's not buried there. We know that Rachel obviously isn't buried there. The problem is we really don't know, and we do know who specifically the Torah says is buried there: Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah.
Right.
It says that they're buried there. So we know that they're buried there. And we do know where it says Rachel was buried near Bethlehem. But again, this idea that the other patriarchs are buried there is, I think, kind of based on the fact that there was a hope that they all rested together. That one of the things that happens when you die righteously and when you have stability is that your family gets to be buried together. And think about it. It means that they a family lived in the same area for a couple generations. If everyone's buried together, it means that there was some stability there. And it kind of, to some extent, even today, reflects family stability and wealth and unity if the family can all be buried in the same place. When you see those family plots that go back a couple generations, you kind of go, oh, that family must have some money, or that family must really be, had a good life that they were able to all kind of stay together. I mean, we still see that today.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that we don't really know what happened to the rest of the brothers. I mean, it kind of goes from they died in Egypt and they're buried in Egypt, which kind of makes sense, with the exception of Joseph, who actually says to the brothers, to the family, the descendants, get me out of here. The other brothers don't say that. Now, it could be that because their families know to bury them back in Israel, or it could be just that Joseph was adamant about not being buried in Egypt. We don't know. I mean, that's why the Midrash, we have these Midrashim that they are buried there. It's an interesting idea. Look, there's a tradition that we call it Kiryat Arba, which is the other name for Hebron. It's called Kiryat Arba, the village of the four, because it's Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Rebecca, and Jacob and Leah. That there's four couples that are buried there. I mean, that doesn't mean that they weren't, but there is that understanding that that's where they were buried. There are other places in Israel that are thought to be the places where these patriarchs are also buried too. So there's places that they say, oh, this is where Naphtali was buried, because there's a tradition that these guys are buried in their tribal portions. I think it's interesting that you have this these interesting ideas that we don't know, that allow for them to be difference of opinion on it, because we don't have it in the Torah. So again, it's definitely not the main point of these last deathbed confessions to tell us where they were buried, but it's really to teach us ethics and kind of like what to do and what not to do. But it's kind of an interesting question. And again, they believe, at least in 12 patriarchs, testaments of the 12 patriarchs, they're all coming back to life anyways. They're all going to be resurrected. So, all right, let's take a look at what Don has to say, because this is not necessarily what to do. This might be more classified under what not to do.
If you can't be a good example, be a terrible warning.
Yes. Now there's definitely some there's something to be said for, again, these texts trying to teach us, again, what not to do. But again, think about when they were written. Think about the fact that they are, again, this text, at least that we know, was written probably by, you know, Jews who were living in a Roman times, Greco-Roman times, but really Roman. So again, might have been the only versions we have of it came from Greek, but it could have been based originally on Hebrew or Aramaic stuff, we call Semitic, which is Hebrew and Aramaic. But all right, let's take a look.
When Don assembled his family at the last of his life, he spoke, "I confess before you this day, my children, that I had resolved to kill Joseph, that good and upright man, and I rejoiced over his sale. For his father loved him more than he loved the rest of us. The spirit of envy and boastfulness goaded me on, saying, 'You too are the son of Jacob,' and one of the spirits of Behar stirred me up, saying, 'Take this sword and slay Joseph, for once he is dead, your father will love you.' It was the spirit of anger that was seeking to persuade me to crush Joseph, as a leopard crunches a kid between its teeth. But the God of our father Jacob did not deliver him into my hand to let me find him alone, and he did not permit me to execute this impious deed, that 2 tribes in Israel might not be destroyed."
Right. So it doesn't. I mean, Bahar is it's a scanning error, not my scanning error, but a scanning error of whoever, of the person who scanned this. The word really is Beliar, and the L and the I went together, scanned improperly as Bahar, which is a Torah portion, means by the mountain, at the mountain, Mount Sinai, one of the Torah portions in Leviticus, the end of Leviticus. But it should be Beliar, which is Belial or Beliar, is another name for the devil. Which again kind of teaches us or reminds us that this was written by people who put a lot of stock into evil and the forces of evil. Here it's the spirit of envy, which might be again a personification of these vices or sins, which we saw I guess last week when we talked about with Reverend Lynn about this, and the fact that in early Christianity these are actually seen as actually like demons. These 7 deadly sins are actually become anthropomorphized and they actually like work in the world. So Dan is when Dan says this, he also and again I always I say Dan and Naphtali together because they're both the sons of Bilhah. They're Bilhah's sons. And here again, it doesn't really lay too much of the blame on the fact that he's the son of a concubine. But there's this kind of idea that these are sons that are not necessarily right on the forefront of Jacob's mind, if you will, to put it mildly. Excuse me. When you're the middle child of 12, it's easy to be forgotten. And Don and Naphtali at 5 and 6 are literally the middle children of 12. Yes. But again, because he wasn't successful, it says if he had been successful, he would have destroyed Joseph, but then he would have been destroyed too. So it reminds us that again, he's fighting for his own life too, in a way, because he would have destroyed himself. So God isn't just, it's not he's fighting for his life, God's fighting for his life and so he won't be destroyed. So Don is saying what not to do. And here's what he says.
"And now, my children, I'm about to die, and I tell it to you in truth. if you take not heed against the spirit of lies and anger, and if you love not truth and generosity, you will perish. The spirit of anger casts the net of error around its victim, and it blinds his eye, and the spirit of lies warps his mind and clouds his vision. Evil is anger. It is the grave of the soul. Desist from anger and hate lies, that the Lord may dwell among you, and Beliar, flee from your presence. Speak the truth, each to his neighbor, and you will not fall into anger and trouble, but you will be at peace. And the Lord of peace you will have with you, and no war will vanquish you. I speak thus, for I know that in the latter days you will fall off from God, and you will kindle the wrath of Levi, and rise in rebellion against Judah. But you will not accomplish aught against them, for the angel of the Lord is their guide, and Israel will perish through them. And if you turn recreant to the Lord, you will execute every kind of evil thing, and do the abominations of the heathen, committing unchastity with the wives of the godless, while the tempter spirits are at work among you. Therefore, you will be carried away into captivity, and in the lands of exile you will suffer all the plagues of Egypt and all the tribulations of the heathen. But when you return to the Lord, you will find mercy. He will take you into his sanctuary and grant you peace. And now, my children, fear the Lord, and be on your guard against Satan and his spirits. Keep aloof from every evil deed. Cast anger away from you and every sort of lie. Love truth and forbearance. And what you have heard from your father, tell to your children. Avoid all manner of unrighteousness. Cling to the integrity of the law of the Lord, and bury me near my fathers. Having spoken these words, he kissed his children and fell asleep.
Okay. So now here's the thing. Definitely you see in this text a little bit of, I don't want to say Christianity, but Christian theology, if you will, right? It seems a little, in some ways, it seems a little Christian. Now, the text is definitely concerned with the exile of the Jewish people, but it definitely seems to have this idea of there's Satan, and Satan can get you to do bad things, and that's one thing. And then again, this idea that you know, the devil is out there to get you to turn against God. Now, in the 1920s, I'm going to save this until we read the next paragraph. We'll read the next text, and then we'll talk a little bit about this. Anybody else want to say anything about the testament of Dan before we read about his brother Naphtali? Right, he has a full brother. Dan and Naphtali are both the sons of Bilhah and Jacob, but they're Bilhah's sons. Let's take a look at Naphtali. But any other questions or points about Don's words? Again, there are more words of caution. I mean, the other ones were caution. Even Zebulun or Issachar were words of caution, and this idea that they see the future, right? And so the brothers have prophetic gifts, and so not necessarily Christian either, because we know that in the book of Daniel, I mean, we have all the prophets, but these seem to really be like way in the future, or at least what they're talking about here. If they wrote it during the Greco-Roman period, they're writing it 1,500, 1,800 years after Dan and Joseph, right? And so they're writing about way in the future, not like Isaiah and Jeremiah and some of these other prophets that were writing about things that were going to happen 50, 60 years later. Talking about 1,800 years later. I mean, keep that in mind, because again, it's partly this it's partly this power of Satan type of stuff that's interesting, but it's also this prophecy for things that are happening way in the future. So let's keep that in mind as we read Naphtali.
Naphtali's dreams of the division of the tribes. In the 132nd year of his life, Naphtali invited all his children to a banquet. The next morning when he awoke, he told them that he was dying, but they would not believe him. He, however, praised the Lord and assured them again that his death was due after the banquet of the day before. Then he addressed his last words to his children. I was born of Bilhah, and because Rachel had acted with cunning and had given Jacob Bilhah instead of herself, I was called Naphtali. Rachel loved me, for I was born upon her knees, and while I was still very young, she was in the habit of kissing me and saying, oh, that I had a brother to you from my own body, one in your image. Therefore, Joseph assembled me in all respects in accordance with Rachel's prayer. My mother Bilhah was a daughter of Rothias, a brother of Devorah, Rebekah's nurse, and she was born the same day as Rachel. As for Rothias, he was of the family of Abraham, a Chaldean, God-fearing and a free man of noble birth. And when he was taken captive, he was bought by Laban and married to his slave Aina. She bore Rothias his second daughter called Bilhah, saying, my daughter, can you roll it up? My screen's frozen.
Yeah, you skipped a line, but she bore Rothias' daughter and he called her Zilpah after the village. It's okay.
Oh, there it is. Sorry. She bore Rothias a daughter, and he called her Zilpah, after the name of the village in which he was taken captive. His second daughter he called Bilhah, saying, my daughter is impetuous, for hardly was she born when she hastened to suckle.
Okay, so let's pause right there. Talk a little bit about this, because this is Midrash, folks, and this is one of the reasons why we're careful to say, this doesn't just sound like something written by a Christian writer 2,000 years ago, because they're dealing with stuff here that's very rabbinic in nature and in style and in substance. Because there's this question that we may have had, or you may have had, is where did Bilhah and Zilpah come from? Now we have a rabbinic tradition. We have a midrash from Pirkei to Rabbi Eliezer, which says that Bilhah and Zilpah, and you may have heard this before, Bilhah and Zilpah, who is their father? Does anybody know? Anybody want to throw out one of the traditional midrash on this? Their father is none other than Laban. They are Rachel and Leah's half-sisters anyways. Laban has them with his own concubine. So they're lower level, they're daughters of concubines, and so they're not daughters of Laban's wife, but they are part of Laban's family, which means they're part of the Israelite people. They're part, or not Israelite people, sorry, they're part of the Abrahamic people, which means that while they're not descendants of Isaac or Jacob, or obviously not Jacob, they're Jacob's wives, but they're not descendants of Isaac. They are descendants of Abraham, which makes them pretty good, at least close enough to be married into the family or to have kids. Well, this version is a little different, which is that Bilhah's father is a man named Rothias, which, by the way, sounds pretty darn Greek to me. It is Greek. But yet he is a descendant of Abraham as well. Except in this case, it says he's a brother of Devorah, this woman who we know of as Rebekah's nurse. We don't know anything about Deborah other than she's very special and she's buried. We read about where she's buried and the fact that like the whole family is affected by Deborah's death. And so we read about her in the Bible, and she is in the Midrash too, that she was a very special person. But here it's that, again, she's a link, and this is, again, very Midrashic, that she's a link to Bilhah and Zilpah, that Deborah is therefore Bilhah and Zilpah's aunt. So she's part of the family. and she's related to Abraham. Doesn't say how, but she's from Abraham's family. Maybe some other line of Terach, some other connection through Terach, right? Terach's brother's family, if you will. Even tells us the mother of Bilhah and Zilpah, her name is Aina. So we have these people that we've never heard of before, ever, Rotheus and Aina. And we have the fact that they are connected to Jacob by blood. They're kind of, again, it says they're Chaldean. They're from the family of Abraham. They're God-fearing. And so that's how Bilhah and Zilpah get into the picture. What they also have, which is very consistent with the earlier and other, I don't say earlier, but the other midrashim we have about her, is that Rachel is very connected with Dan and Naphtali, because Bilhah is Rachel's concubine. And just like Sarah did with Hagar, Rachel did the same thing with Bilhah. It was Rachel's idea for Jacob to sleep with Bilhah and to give her the children, so that essentially Dan and Naphtali were Rachel's children as well, which means that Dan and Naphtali should have been closer to Joseph. They should have been closer because they're kind of like Rachel's family, which is why Dan turning on Joseph is actually even worse. Because even though they're still half brothers like the other brothers, like Levi or Shimon, there's actually a different level of connection, which is that they're Bilhah's kids, which makes them kind of like, according to this Midrash and other Midrashim, kind of like Rachel's kids. So they're not exactly full brothers, but they're kind of like a little closer to being full brothers through Rachel. So that's why we have this Midrash. And that's why it's very similar in some ways to other Jewish Midrash that we have. I'm going to get to the other point that I was going to say. I'm saving until we finish this for you to see what's so interesting about this Testament of the 12 Patriarchs and why it actually might be one of the more important books that we have, that we've discovered. I wouldn't say discovered, because we've discovered it as Jews, but it's kind of was preserved in the Middle Ages by the church, including, by the way, the Armenian church, just so you know. All right, let's read about Naphtali, a little bit more about Naphtali.
I was fleet of foot like a deer, and my father Jacob appointed me to be his messenger, and in his blessing he called me a hind let loose. As the potter knows the vessel he fashions, how much it is to hold, and uses clay accordingly, so the Lord makes the body in conformity with the soul, and to agree with the capacity of the body, he plans the soul. The one corresponds to the other, down to the third of a hairbreadth. For the whole of creation was made by weight and measure and rule. And as the potter knows the use of every vessel he fashions, so the Lord knows the body of his creature, unto what point it will be steadfast in the good, and at what point it will fall into evil ways. Now then, my children, let your conduct be well ordered unto good in the fear of God. Do nothing that is ill-regulated or untimely, for though you tell your eye to hear, it yet cannot, and as little can you do deeds of light while you abide in darkness.
Okay. Interesting little text here. A little bit of there's a little bit of a reflection on who we are, body and soul. God creates the body in conformity with the soul. And so the body and soul are kind of measured up or planned with each of the other in mind. There definitely here is let's say this right now. There's definitely a reflection here, or this definitely betrays the idea that there is a body and a soul which are separate, to some extent separate from each other. Though, again, it says here that they have to be planned by God. The measurements and the fact that a body and soul are matched up, that God knows every angle and every, as they say, every hair breadth for the body and soul, that they match up perfectly. But it does reflect that the body and soul are different, right? So you start with that, and then you can get into, and how do the body and soul conform to each other, and how are they similar? Well, okay, but it's still based on this idea that there's two different elements. There's two different elements to who we are. And that while our soul is within our body, we have to take good care of it. And that is an important part of our teaching. It's an important part of our prayers that we're supposed to say every morning. We thank God for our body and we thank God for our soul. And this is the important part of recognizing that there is a dichotomy, that there is a separation, but again, that we take care of both. One is not evil and one is not good. Obviously, the body is supposed to be evil and the soul is good. We don't have that, but that teaching, but you can go down that road. When you start to separate them, you can get to that point where, is one of them good and one of them's bad? Well, which one's going to be good? The one that lasts forever, the one that's eternal, the one that's God. And to some extent, that's reflected here, which is that God creates our body to be the vessel for the soul. And it is definitely, our bodies are God's creation, but it's a vessel. So it says the Lord knows the body of his creature, which the creature is the soul, but the body is being created by God. Anybody want to reflect or say anything about that part? Let's take a look.
Furthermore, Naphtali said to his children, I give you no command concerning my silver or my gold or any other possession that I bequeath to you. And what I command you is not a hard matter, which you cannot do, but I speak to you concerning an easy thing which you can execute. Then his sons answered and said, Speak, Father, for we are listening to your words. Naphtali continued, I give you no commandments except regarding the fear of God, that you should serve him and follow after him. Then the sons of Naphtali asked, Wherefore does he require our service? And he replied, saying, He needs no creature, but all creatures need him. Nevertheless, he has not created the world for naught, but that men should fear him, and none should do unto his neighbor what he would not have others do unto him. His sons asked again, Father, have you observed that we strayed from the ways of the Lord to the right or to the left? Naphtali replied, God is witness, and so am I witness for you, that it is as you say. But I fear regarding future times, that you may depart from the ways of the Lord and follow after the idols of the stranger, and walk in the statutes of the heathen peoples, and join yourselves unto the sons of Joseph instead of the sons of Levi and Judah. The sons of Naphtali spoke, What reason have you for commanding this thing to us? Naphtali, because I know that the sons of Joseph will one day turn recreant to the Lord, the God of their fathers, and it is they that will lead the sons of Israel into sin and cause them to be driven away from their inheritance, their beautiful land, to a land that is not ours, even as it was Joseph that brought the Egyptian bondage down upon us.
Okay. So let's explain what just happened there, which is that Naphtali is telling his descendants, there's going to be some rough times in the future. And here's the interesting flip here. It's Joseph's family. When he's saying the sons of Joseph, he's literally saying from Joseph's family, from the tribe of Ephraim, we're going to have somebody who's going to lead Israel to sin. And here he's speaking specifically about King Jeroboam, who, according to the Bible, according to the book of Kings, revolts against King David's family against Rehoboam, the king that's David's grandson through Solomon. And he leads the people in the north away from and splits the kingdom apart. And so what's interesting here is Naphtali says, ironically, it's Joseph's own family that's responsible for this. Joseph, the guy who saves us, his family are the ones who end up destroying us. Not completely, but lots of us. And so, again, this guy who saved us, his family are going to be the ones that are the seeds of our destruction. So it's an interesting little, yeah, well, if you think Joseph's good, yeah, he is, but his family, it's not, it's an interesting flip, which is that it's going to be the other sons that are going to be responsible for keeping us alive, and specifically the sons of Levi and Judah, our ancestors. Folks, most of us are descendants of those two tribes, the Levites and the Kohanim, right, of the Levites, and the tribe of Judah. So the interesting thing is it's these other sons that are going to disappear. So Naphtali continues. And this is what, yeah.
I will tell you, my children, the vision I had while I was yet a shepherd of flocks. I saw my brethren pasturing their herds with me, and our father approached and said, "Up, my sons, each one take what he can in my presence." We answered and said to him, "What shall we take? We see nothing but the sun, the moon, and the stars." Then our father said, "These shall you take." Levi, hearing this, snatched up an ox goad, sprang up to the sun and sat upon him, and rode. Judah did likewise. He jumped up to the moon and rode upon her. And the other 9 tribes did the same. Each rode upon his star or his planet in the heavens. Joseph remained behind, alone on the earth, and our father Jacob said to him, "My son, why have you not done like your brothers?" Joseph answered, "What right have men born of women to be in the heavens, seeing that in the end they must stay on earth?" While Joseph was speaking thus, a tall steer appeared before him. He had great pinions like the wings of the stork, and his horns were as long as those of the reem. Jacob urged his son, "Up, Joseph, mount the steer." Joseph did as his father bade him, and Jacob went his way. For the space of 2 hours, Joseph displayed himself upon the steer, sometimes galloping, sometimes flying, until he reached Judah. Then Joseph unfolded the standard in his hand and began to rain blows down upon Judah with it. And when his brother demanded the reason for this treatment, he said, "Because you have 12 rods in your hand, and I have but one. Give yours to me, and peace shall prevail between us." But Judah refused to do his bidding, and Joseph beat him until he dropped 10 rods, and only 2 remained in his clutch. Joseph now invited his brethren to abandon Judah and follow after him. They all did this except Benjamin, who stayed true to Judah. Levi was grieved over the desertion of Judah, and he descended from the sun. Toward the end of the day, a storm broke out, and it scattered the brothers, so that no 2 were together. When I gave an account of my vision to my father Jacob, he said, "It is but a dream. It can neither help nor harm."
Does anybody, I hope everybody understands what that dream is about, right? That's the dream about Jeroboam leading the tribes away from Judah, away from King David. So that only Judah and Benjamin are left from the 12 tribes. The other northern tribes, they disappear. So they leave, and then they end up getting conquered by the Assyrians, and they're gone. So that's what that dream is about. It's about the future. It's about the loss of those northern tribes. So it's very apocalyptic, but it happened. It happened. It happened during the time of the Assyrians. It happened over a 200-year period when the tribes of the north revolted and went and started their own kingdom. And then, of course, later on, a couple hundred years later, that kingdom is destroyed and the people disappear, become the lost tribes. So he tells, according to this, Naphtali tells his father the dream, and then that's the end of it, according to Jacob. Just a dream. Here's what happens.
A short while thereafter, another vision was revealed to me. I saw all of us together with our father at the shores of the sea, and a ship appeared in the midst of the sea, and it had neither sailors nor other crew. Our father spoke, "Do you see what I see?" And when we answered that we did, he commanded us to follow him. He took off his clothes and sprang into the sea, and we sprang after him. Levi and Judah were the first to scale the side of the ship. Our father cried after them, "See what is written upon the mast, for there is no ship that does not bear the name of the owner upon the mast." Levi and Judah scrutinized the writing, and what they read was this: "This ship and all the treasures therein belong to the son of Barachel." Yeah. Jacob thanked God for having blessed him, not only on land, but also upon the sea. And he said to us, "Stretch forth your hands, and whatsoever each one seizes shall be his." Levi caught hold of the big mast, Judah of the second mast, next to Levi's, and the other brothers, with the exception of Joseph, took the oars, and Jacob himself seized the two rudders, wherewith to guide the ship. He bade Joseph take an oar too, but he refused to do his father's bidding, and Jacob gave him one of the rudders. After our father had instructed us, each one, in what we had to do, he disappeared. Whereupon Joseph took possession of the second rudder too. All went smoothly for a time, as long as Judah and Joseph acted together in harmony with each other, and Judah kept Joseph informed in which direction to steer. But a quarrel broke out between them, and Joseph did not guide the vessel in the way his father had commanded him. And Judah attempted to direct him, and the vessel was wrecked upon a rock. Levi and Judah descended from the masts, and likewise the other brethren left the ship and escaped to the shore. At this moment Jacob appeared, and he found us scattered in all directions. And we reported to him how Joseph had caused the vessel to run aground because he had refused, out of jealousy of Judah and Levi, to steer it according to their instructions. Then Jacob asked us to show him the spot where we had lost the ship, of which only the masts were visible above the water. He emitted a whistle, summoning us all, and he swam out into the water and raised the vessel as before. Turning to Joseph, he spoke thus: "My son, never do that again. Never permit jealousy of your brethren to master you. Nearly it happened that all your brethren perished because of you." When I told my father what I had seen in this vision, he clasped his hands and tears flowed from his eyes. And he said, "My son, for that the vision was doubled to you twice, I am dismayed and I shudder for my son Joseph. I loved him more than all of you, but by reason of his perverseness, you will be carried away into captivity and scattered among the nations." Your first and your second vision had the same meaning. The vision is one.
Right. And there we have that biblical motif, which is you dream the dream twice, it means it's going to happen. Right? So Joseph has a dream like that. Pharaoh has a dream like that. And Jacob recognizes when he hears this vision of Naphtali that this is what's going to happen, that the people are going to clearly be carried away into captivity, that we are going to be exiled. And so Jacob is now, the first time he says it's just a dream. Now he says, unfortunately, this is what's going to happen. And he starts crying because he realizes that his family is doomed for not good times ahead. But what do you do? And so this is what Naphtali says happens after that vision, or those visions come to Jacob's attention. Here's what he does.
"Therefore, my sons, I command you not to join yourselves unto the sons of Joseph, but you shall join yourselves to the sons of Levi and Judah. I tell you too that my inheritance shall be of the best of Palestine, the middle of the earth. You will eat, and the delectable gifts of my portion will satisfy you. But I warn you not to kick in your prosperity and not to become perverse, resisting the commands of God, who satisfies you with the best of his land, and not to forget your God, whom your father Abraham chose when the families of the earth were divided in the days of Peleg. The Lord descended with 70 angels at their head, Michael, and he commanded, the Lord descended with 70 angels at their head, Michael, and he commanded them to teach the 70 languages to the 70 families of Noah. The angels did according to the behest of God, and the holy Hebrew language remained only in the house of Shem and Ever, and in the house of their descendant, Abraham. On this day of teaching languages, Michael came to each nation separately and told it the message with which God had charged him, saying, I know the rebellion and the confusion you have enacted against God. Now make choice of him. Whom you will serve, and whom will you have as your mediator in heaven? Then spoke Nimrod, the wicked. In my eyes, there is none greater than he that taught me the language of Cush. The other nations also answered in words like these, each one designated its angel. But Abraham said, I choose none other than him that spoke, and the world was. In him I will have faith, and my seed forever and ever. Thenceforth God put every nation in the care of its angel, but Abraham and his seed he kept for himself.
Yeah. Now we also have a midrash, of course, a legend, a series of legends, that Michael is our angel, is our protecting angel, God's head angel. So that God, when God is sending a messenger to us, he sends his head angel, Michael. Which, by the way, if you've been watching the last season of Lucifer, Michael is not good. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but spoiler alert that Michael is not the Michael that we have in Jewish legend, which is that he's the really, really good angel. But here we have a weird backstory that goes back to the beginning of Genesis, back to when nations split up after the Tower of Babel and the again this time of differentiation amongst the nations, that we chose God. We didn't want a different language. We wanted God's language. And because we wanted God's language, the Hebrew language, we get rewarded. We didn't want to have our angel's language. It's a very weird midrash, which basically tells us that different nations follow different ways, but they're not God's ways. And in a weird way, and again, a weird explanation, Hebrew is the language of God, and so we're getting the message directly from God, not from a mediator, not from not from one of these angels. So there's a lot of this where people start going, this doesn't sound very Jewish, but we found a lot of stuff now, discovered lots of texts which are similar to this and seem to kind of relay this angelic, the level of angelology that was very pervasive at the time that this was written 2,000 years ago. There was a lot of archaeological evidence we have now that these angels were referred to in prayers and in text and in amulets, if you will. So we know that this was actually fairly common, this type of belief and this type of language. So there's nothing really anti or not Jewish about this, or kind of like a weird perversion of Judaism. This actually seems probably fairly common amongst the populace to have these kinds of beliefs and these uses of the angels and this belief of what they do, what the angels do, which is that the angels represent different countries. Every country has its own angel, its own representative in heaven. But that we actually opted not to have that. We go directly to God. And so here it continues with Naphtali's testimony.
Therefore, I adjure you not to go astray and serve other gods beside him whom our fathers made choice of. You can perceive somewhat of his power in the creation of man. From head to foot is man wonderfully made. With his ears he hears, with his eyes he sees, with his brain he comprehends, with his nose he smells, with the tubes of his throat he utters sound, with his gullet he swallows food, with his tongue he articulates, with his mouth he forms words, with his hands he does his work, with his heart he meditates, with his spleen he laughs, with his liver he waxes angry, with his stomach he crushes his food, with his feet he walks, with his lungs he breathes, and with his kidneys he makes resolves. And none of his organs undergoes a change in function, and each performs its own. Therefore, it behooves man to take to heart who it is that has created him, and who has developed him from a foul-smelling drop in the womb of a woman, who has brought him to the light of the world, and who has given sight to his eyes, and who has bestowed the power of motion upon his feet, who makes him to stand upright, who has infused the breath of life into him, and who has imparted of his own pure spirit unto him. Happy the man, therefore, that pollutes not the Holy Spirit of God within him by doing evil deeds, and well for him if he returns it to his Creator as he received it.
So, as you can see, the Testament of Naphtali is really a beautiful work that deals with theology and deals with angels and with dreams and the future, apocalyptic futures and things like that. But here we have this wonderful little meditation on our human body, or at least the way our ancestors, the way people 2,000 years ago felt what the human body did. Now, again, this definitely reveals a Greco-Roman understanding of the human body. Is it a Jewish understanding of the human body? Well, it is a Jewish version of that, definitely affected by Greco-Roman teachings and also ancient Near Eastern teachings, because some of these the Greeks got from Babylonia and Persia and Egypt. So there's a few things there. There's quite a few things there. One of them, of course, is this idea for everything that they didn't know about who we are. They did know some things, and they did understand that there was a part of who we are that is from a man and from a woman. Now, I will tell you that they believed that the part that was inside the woman was a foul-smelling drop in the womb of a woman. That is not unheard of. I mean, it's consistent with the language we have in other sources that refer to how we're created. That the part of us that's inside the woman is with the recognition that we don't come into existence without it. That we start off as nothing special, to put it mildly. But yet, through us, God gives light to the world. God literally puts the energy inside of us, inside of our bodies, that help us literally live, but help God live. Right? And so our job is not to soil that body and soul specifically with what we do here, right? And not to pollute it with what we do in this world, to try to keep it holy. It's a very Jewish idea. It's one that we still refer to in the prayer, right? Eloheinu shamash and atata bi tahorahi. We're supposed to say every morning, thank you, God, the soul that you've given me is pure, right? You imparted it into me. This is very consistent with our prayers. What do we make of the physiology, this lesson of the body, right? Of these different things. Well, some of them make sense, right? You know, we swallow food and we speak through our larynx, and those things all kind of make sense. We smell with our nose. But what about this part about the spleen and the heart and the liver and the kidneys? these were pretty common ideas that emotions
Oh, bile.
and feelings have a corresponding organ for them. So that the heart, we say we love with our heart. Well, we also meditate with our heart, according to the tradition, that the heart really is the seat for some really powerful activity, not just emotion. Actually, as you see, some of our emotions actually come from other parts of our body, including the spleen and the liver. The liver is where our anger is, right? Our bile comes out of there. Our kidneys, right, are where our resolve comes from. These are ideas that are based on, some of what people believed in those days about the body. And when you're sick, that you see physiological and emotional changes in people. And maybe if there's a problem with one of your bodily organs, that's why it's manifesting itself in the way that you're living, in the way that you're behaving, or the way that your attitudes and your emotions are reflective of problems in these different organs. And so there was work that people did on balancing those organs, and trying to get you to, in some cases, medicines were prescribed because they knew that they had an effect on the spleen or on the liver. And they would give people certain types of purgatories, if you will, that, specifically would work on the liver or on the kidneys. Because again, the belief that if we got rid of those toxins in your kidneys, you'll have a better success in work, because your resolution will be better, or, you'll be happier if your spleen is cured. If we can get into the spleen somehow and get that up and running right, your humor will come back. I mean, we actually call them the humors, right? The different parts of your emotions that need to be balanced in order for you to be healthy. So it's interesting that we looked at those kinds of things, and what, as we learn more about the body, we actually learn that there are parts of our bodies that do, help balance some of our psychological chemicals, if you will, too. That there's an interrelationship between our body and our minds, at least, that's really important. That we can't, have a healthy emotional life if our physical bodies are not working, not just because we feel sick or because we are not happy because we're lying in bed with an illness, but that there's literally a biofeedback loop that hurts us when some part of our body is off, that it can hurt the levels of serotonin or other parts of our bodily emotional the chemicals that help regulate us. So as much as this seems kind of laughable, it's not really. There is something here which is really powerful that we might eventually come to grips with, which is that our bodies need to function right for our minds to also function right, or for our mental health. We also need to have good physical health too. The relationship is really serious. I mean, this is something we do know a little bit more about now. So it's an interesting little lesson here. Not necessarily, again, any indication that this isn't Jewish at all. But if anything, that this is pretty consistent with what the rabbis themselves would teach occasionally when they go off into physiology in the Talmud. It's very similar stuff here. This is not at all a departure from traditional Judaism. All right, and now we're going to read this last paragraph.
After Naphtali had charged his children thus, and with many other lessons like these, he enjoined them to carry his remains to Hebron, to be buried there near his fathers. Then he ate and drank with rejoicing, covered his face and died, and his sons did according to all that their father Naphtali had commanded them.
Well, Naphtali seems to have led a good life. Gives a really good message, right? And unlike Dan, his full brother, he seems to have had his act together. We, of course, know, and Naphtali refers to it, that he's known as the fast brother, right? He has that special power of being able to be really, really super fast. He's the messenger, and he's the guy who runs around in the Midrash bringing messages to his family. But according to tradition, and he's represented by the hind, the antelope, the deer, a fast animal. That is his symbol. He seems to have his act together. Don't know much about him in the Bible at all. And now I share with you maybe the most important part of this text that's not in the text. So I told you there's a very important piece of historical fact here. Let's take a look, folks, at why the Testament of Naphtali is so important. Everybody sees up on their screen a bunch of fragments, right? Well, you can see at the top where those fragments are from, right? Does everybody see it? Mm-hmm. Those fragments, folks, are from the Dead Sea Scrolls. These were found in Cave 4 of Qumran. And these are from the Testament of Naphtali. This is why this text is super, super important. Because what this does is it shows us that this text, and it's not the whole text, the pieces, the fragments we have here are from different versions of the Testament of Naphtali. But what it tells us is that the people at Qumran read this text. They had this text. And they kept it. They thought it was valuable enough to keep. Now, as I told you, there was a theory when this was translated in the early 1900s. Ginsburg, who was the editor of the book that we're reading right now, The Legends of the Jews, that this wasn't really a Jewish text, that this was actually a Greco-Roman text, that wasn't a Jewish text, maybe a early Christian text. And so people, I wouldn't say dismissed it, or even, I mean, Christians obviously didn't dismiss it, but there were people in the Jewish community who felt maybe it's not legitimate, if you will. Maybe it's not really our issue at all. That's not the case. What the Dead Sea Scrolls proved, and this is why the Dead Sea Scrolls are so important, is it proved that these texts were very consistent with other Jewish texts. That there was definitely a Jewish source for these, because these scrolls, folks, as you can see, are written in Hebrew and Aramaic. That's Hebrew, that's not Greek. So that means that there were Hebrew versions of these stories that existed that predated Christianity by a couple hundred years. And that there was a common source for Jewish and Christian teachings, or I wouldn't even say Jewish teachings. We know they're Jewish teachings. And we know that there were Jews who were talking about these kinds of things before there was Christianity. So the idea that Christianity was this aberration, that was something that just came out of Judaism out of nowhere, or really wasn't Jewish, the Dead Sea Scrolls proved that these were Jewish texts, that these were Jewish people that were writing these kinds of things. The problem that we have is that the version of the book that we have had hundreds of years of being in only Christian source, Christian keeping, if you will. And so it could be that the texts were changed and were elaborated on. The part of the Qumran text that we have deals with the early part of the text that we read about Naphtali's origin story and about who Bilhah's father was and those kinds of things. So it doesn't give us a great understanding of everything that's there. But there's other parts of the Qumran text that are very similar to, and I don't mean the Naphtali text, but the Damascus, what we call the Damascus scroll, which is very similar to some of the stuff that we just read about the human body and the soul. And the fact that those texts are also in Qumran, in other places, in other caves, we found texts that are very similar to the theology that we see in the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, and not just the one of Naphtali. And so you can see that Qumran actually proved that Ginsburg and other people were right in their gut feeling that these texts were written by Jews, and they were not written by early Christians. Even though the church kept the texts, they were actually written by Jews. And so Qumran does a lot. The Dead Sea Scrolls do a lot of things. They're very important for lots of reasons. But one of the most important is that it actually shows us what Jews read and what they believed, what they thought, what they taught. And so it verifies that things that we didn't keep these. The church kept them, but they kept Jewish texts, which, why shouldn't they? They kept the Bible. They kept lots of things that were Jewish texts. And the 12 Patriarchs were also Jewish texts. So today, most people don't argue that there wasn't a Jewish source. The problem of how much of the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs were embellished or added to by those Christian scholars, there's no way to know. We can kind of see sometimes that sounds like it was, but we don't know for sure. But again, the Dead Sea Scrolls do lots of things. This is one of the most important things, is it verifies that the texts that we have, in some cases, even ones that we didn't keep, were really important at one point in Jewish history. So that's one of the cool things about, and Ginsburg died before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, so he didn't know that he would be backed up on this, but he was right. And so were the other Jews who fought to study this before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. I mean, the interesting thing is would we still be having, you have to assume we'd still be having this argument that these texts were these texts really Jewish if it hadn't been for the Dead Sea Scrolls. So again, why do we get excited by the Dead Sea Scrolls, or why am I excited by the Dead Sea Scrolls? Because they actually teach us a lot about Judaism, and they're really, really important. I wanted you to see a little bit of why they're important. I think actually we will probably, that's a good place for us to leave off. You got the big reveal, which was the big reveal being that Testament of Naphtali is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and was definitely important for us at some point in our Jewish history. Any questions or comments on that heavy duty thing that I just laid on you, which is that God works in mysterious ways, and the Dead Sea Scrolls are one of the most mysterious things that we have ever seen, which is why I always take groups out there. When we go to Israel on our trips to Israel, I always take people out to Qumran. Some Jewish groups don't go there. Almost every Christian group goes there, by the way. Really cool for Christian groups because kind of, it's a contemporary thing to when Jesus lived, and they can kind of see what life was like for Jews at that time. But Jewish groups sometimes don't go to Qumran. I think it's one of the coolest places in Israel because of what we discovered there and what that library did for us, which is help us understand who we are. Definitely helps Christians understand who they are, but it really helps us understand who we are. And what it also did too, and it's not really relevant for the Midrash, well, though it might be in a weird way. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed a lot of what Josephus had written about Jewish history. And Josephus, again, lived at the same time as the people were living in Qumran. He wrote about the people at Qumran. He wrote about the Essenes and that group of people. And so it definitely has a lot to bear on Josephus, what we found at Qumran. But what Josephus did too is he wrote a great history of the Jewish people, of his people, called the Antiquities of the Jews. And he drew on these sources like the Midrash and like the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, those kinds of sources. He drew on them. And for a long time, Jewish sources I would say they kind of poo-pooed Josephus because they thought Josephus was a turncoat, was a traitor, was a Roman pawn. Josephus was all of those things, but he also was a Jew who was very proud of his Judaism, and wanted the Romans and Greeks and those kinds of people to know how ancient the Jewish people were and how special they were. And so he was very proud of his Judaism, and he wrote a great Jewish history that he in some cases used the Midrash for. And so what Qumran did is it at least verified that Josephus's a lot of what he wrote historically was not made up. Again, his Antiquities was based on Midrash and was based on the Bible. He really kind of retold the Bible and the Midrash. He synthesized it and told those stories for a Greek audience. So he kind of retold creation and Abraham and Moses with the Midrash. He taught Christians, or not Christians even, there weren't really many Christians yet. He taught the pagan world about Judaism through this. And it basically shows that Josephus used sources, in some cases, that we would have also poo-pooed, like the 12 patriarchs. He used them, and he used them, I think, pretty well. So again, the Dead Sea Scrolls also teaches us a little bit about Josephus, who also used the Midrash. And so we can kind of say, Josephus' sources were legitimate Jewish sources. We may not have them. Some of them, like the Testaments of the 12 patriarchs, ones like that, they're lost. The church didn't keep them. We didn't keep them. Josephus kept them, or Josephus had access to them, and therefore we can learn a little bit about our Midrash from Josephus too. We don't usually do that. Ginsburg didn't do that, I don't think. I don't think he lifted anything that's just in Josephus. Could be wrong about that. I'm not sure that he did. But we do know that Josephus had access to sources that we don't have, the Christians don't have, that we just don't have it anymore. So with that, folks, we're going to leave you with again, hope that you can join us tomorrow night for Torah study or for Shabbat service coming up on Friday. We're working on what we're doing for pet service too, folks, by the way. We haven't forgotten about the pet service that we always do outdoors, and maybe we'll do it again.
I'm wondering about that.
Yeah. Well, as my daughter just came in, Shira was hovering there for a long time, trying to make me laugh and wanted everybody to know that we're getting a dog. But there is a small chance that even by the next pet service that we will join all those holders and bearers of life that we know as animals and pets, that we may have one by then. So I'm not promising, and I definitely am not going to rush into it so that we can have it for the pet service, but we may have one soon. So she wanted everybody to know that. She's very excited. She's very excited by her dog, or her impending dog. And with that, I don't want to think about it, but we will. We will leave. Yes, Francine says Charlie and Buddy have to get blessed. Oh well, listen. I mean, if people want, I'm up for doing it. I'm leaning towards doing it, but we have to make sure that we are not going to upset anybody by doing it. So we're doing our best. We will probably have a pet service one way or the other. And it would not be this week. It would be not this weekend. It would be next weekend anyway. So we have a few days to warn everybody. Get your pets ready. Everybody take care. Stay healthy. Hope your pets are good too. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.